Okay, so there are a couple of major events happening in New Zealand at the moment, probably more than two, but two that we're going to touch on today. The first being the current outbreak of COVID-19 back in New Zealand and the subsequent government action on that, and then the fallout from that in terms of community response and economic response. And the other being the impending election. So I've invited David Seymour, the leader of the H Party, to sit with me this morning and chat to my SME audience and investor audience. So David, thanks again for taking the time to sit with me today. I know that you're probably not as busy as you'd hope to be this close to an election.
Yeah, well, look, Gemma, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be on here, and especially what a great initiative you've got going. So thank you, first of all. And, you're right. I mean, everyone, no matter what business you're in, is just facing massive uncertainty. And it's true that, we're in the business of politics. We run election campaigns, and the logistics of that are under pressure. But, that's just a footnote of what so many people are facing. Will we be in lockdown? What will be the level of activity? And then how will other people react to that stuff? Obviously, it means that everyone faces a great deal of uncertainty.
I've seen some of your commentary, particularly around the levels of lockdown. We've got a level 3 over in Auckland, level 2 everywhere else, including the South Island, which I'm scratching my head a little bit about. But you've commented on some businesses who are particularly close to the perimeter of the Auckland boundary, with employees and businesses being on other sides of that boundary. So that some of the logistics of being in lockdown at the moment are kind of tricky.
Yeah, you're right. And so if you look at ACT's philosophy, I mean, we're generally in favour of government doing less, but that doesn't mean that we're anarchists. We think that there's a role for government, and government should do less and do what it does do well. So when it comes to managing an epidemic, just about no one in the world was prepared outside of some Asian countries that had experience with SARS. Where we do criticise them is that I don't think they have been prepared enough, given the last 4 months breathing space they had before this outbreak. And what do we mean by prepared? Well, one really obvious role of government is to set clear rules of the game. And at the borders of Auckland, there is just mass confusion. I've heard that there's one school, which is actually in the Waikato technically, but is shut down because the teachers can't get there from Auckland. I've had a constituent today who needs his employee to get into Auckland to reprogram a food distribution machine, and if it can't be done, then you're actually going to start seeing empty supermarket shelves within days. There's ambiguity over whether that person can get into Auckland, because technically they're a programmer, but that's a food-related business, but he's a contractor, so no one knows if he can get in. Last I heard this morning, he was going to make a run for it and hope not to get turned back this time. So yeah, mass confusion. And I just take it back to, the government had a clear job, set clear rules for the game. It was conceivable that there would be a regional lockdown and people would be caught on different sides. And yet, clearly they didn't use the time to do that. And I think that's a criticism that as opposition MPs we have to make.
So the first lockdown, I think we were, we all got in behind. We became the team of 5 million. We put our teddy bears in the windows, and we did what we had to do because we didn't know what we were doing. But we've had a lockdown, an extended lockdown. We've had 102 days, and now we're in another lockdown, level 3 in Auckland and level 2 everywhere else. What learnings have we taken? What learnings do we know from those lockdowns and from what other countries are doing that there are going to be further outbreaks in the future? What could we do smarter next time?
So I just look at, how untrusted we politicians are. And the only people less trusted than politicians, according to Reader's Digest, is apparently the journalists who report on us. So maybe it's all their fault. But, I think the reason politicians aren't trusted is that in many instances, collectively, we make promises to people that just can't be kept. So, I will come back to the COVID thing, but let me just give you an example of that. The basic deal that politicians in Western democracies have made over the last 80 years is you give us 1/3 of your income and we will solve all the problems. We'll make sure there's no poverty, everyone has a house and an education and healthcare and a pension. And as it's turned out, we still have a huge number of people suffering badly in all of those areas. And yet the people that are doing well probably would have done well anyway. So why did we give a third of our income? That's the fundamental broken promise that I think has led to a lack of trust in politicians. Now, come to COVID, the implicit promise when Jacinda Ardern did her little dance was that, we've beaten this, you've made the sacrifice, you're going to be okay now. As it turns out, actually, there's the potential of another lockdown at any time in order to maintain that eradication status. So we had 3 months or 4 months almost where we were getting, the benefits without the costs. We felt that as long as we kept the border sealed, then we could live freely and live COVID-free at the same time. Now it's become clear that the government doesn't have a way of maintaining elimination without lockdowns, and it doesn't even know what the length of the lockdowns may be. So the argument that ACT's been making, and we have been making this for some time, since at least July, arguably May, when we did our alternative budget. So this is not, we're just saying it now because stuff's happened, is that we needed to get a lot smarter about the way that we did public health so that we could maintain isolation without more lockdowns. And of course, the government didn't use that time, for instance, to enhance its contact tracing. So it said we wanted contact tracing, it put in place the NZ COVID Tracer app. We now know that actually that was a dog. It's rejected other contact tracing technologies such as Sam Morgan's offering. And of course, we now find ourselves in a situation where, we have this choice between basically being Sweden, which is the choice that the government keeps giving us, or being New Zealand with its constant lockdowns. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah, and that leads to my next question is total elimination the best strategy?
Look, I think there are people who would make the argument that actually the virus is just not that bad and maybe we should just be done with it and let it in. I'm not one of those people that makes that argument. And the reason is that once you have the virus, even if you think that it's acceptable that people are going to die, you still have the problem that people are so fearful of it that you get a massive decline in economic activity. So, if you're running a small business, people are still going to stay away because they're afraid of it. And so it seems that where there are lockdowns, the cost imposed by the lockdown is severe. But you've got to price in that there would have been a reduction of activity anyway. So look, I think maintaining the elimination status is worthwhile. But we've just got to figure out how to do it smarter. So, better testing, more rapid testing, better contact tracing, smarter isolation. If we can do all those things and maintain elimination, then I think it's viable. But it's not viable if the choice is, being, on the one hand, everyone dies, on the other hand, everyone goes broke. Because the government's basically saying, look, you can either be dead broke or dead. And I think that's a terrible proposition to give the New Zealand people.
It is, and I was reading the statistics. 89% of Auckland business owners and an average of 75% nationwide for business owners have accessed the wage subsidy. So that indicates a significant drop of income over an extended period of time, and people are really hurting.
Yeah, and that just this week we've had statistics come out say for the first time in the history of Statistics New Zealand, we have, or the Stats NZ are reporting that incomes this quarter, or in the June quarter, are lower than in the June quarter of 2019. This has never happened. As long as you, me, our grandparents, their grandparents have been in New Zealand, incomes have been constantly rising. That stopped for the first time. And I think that gives you an idea of the kind of impact that these lockdowns have. And that's why we talk about a well-being approach. Let's look at the mental health of small business owners. Let's look at students in their learning. Let's look at people waiting for scans and screening and elective surgery. Let's look at the budget impacts on the next generation who are going to have to pay this debt off. Once you take that overall well-being approach, you see that we've got to do better than lockdowns.
So on the other side of this, I've read your 5-point economic recovery plan. Could you sort of run over the rationale of your 5-point economic recovery plan for us?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things you've got to do there. First of all, there needs to be some stimulus. So we talk about, well, either you can have a stimulus scenario where politicians run around, hand out checks and get their photo taken. And, the classic, which was a major misstep and really rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way, is Jacinda Ardern's, AJ Hackett $10 million giveaway. That really upset a lot of people, and I can understand why. So, the better way to do it in ACT's view is, first of all, cut GST by 5 points for a year. So that's a way to get about $6 billion circulating. And we're not handing it out to any favored group. It's just every time someone buys something, it's a 5% discount, $6 billion extra circulating in the economy. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, a middle income tax cut. So you get to 48 grand, your tax rate goes from 17.5 up to 30. We would cut that to 17.5. So you pay 17.5% tax on all your income from 14 grand to 70. Yeah, that's where and that's permanent, not just 1 year like the GST cut. That gets another $3 billion a year circulating in the economy. So we believe that you've got to run some deficits and do some stimulus, but do it in a way that is not political. It's just, if you earn the money, you get to keep more of it, and then you spend more, and the economy goes better. So that's the second thing. I think generally our 5-point plan is also about how do you stimulate, is also about how do you balance the budget having done that stimulus. So we take $7 billion of current expenditure and say, look, this is not high quality spending. The government's borrowing $140 billion to get through this. We're going to pay it off over the next decade. We've got to start living within our means. So we say $7 billion a year, that's $70 billion over the next decade. We could pay off half the debt just by trimming fat from the government budget. Let me give you an example of that. $1 billion on Shane Jones Provincial Growth Fund, total waste. $1 billion on KiwiSaver subsidies. Now, the government's actually borrowing money to give to people to play the share market. $500 million on fees free for tertiary students. Since when did the Labour Party exist to give money to kids from high income homes to go to university? Totally wasteful. And you can keep going through it. Winter energy payments for millionaires, completely insane. So we show how you could reduce expenditure by $7 billion and balance the books. And that's going to be critical because interest rates will rise. The idea that people are going to give you money, I give you $100 for a year and you pay me back 75 cents interest on that $100 after a year's time. These current interest rates can't last, and when they rise, the interest on that $140 billion is going to be huge. So you've got to balance the budget. But you've also got to do stuff to make it easier to do business. So I look at resource management law. At the moment, it is so difficult for people to get stuff done. We've got to actually make it easier to develop your own property with Resource Management Act replacement. We're not going to scrap it. We're not going to tweak it. We're going to actually start again with new resource management law. And finally, it's just so hard to employ people. A lot of people are small businesses because once they employ more people, it gets complicated and they're liable for PGs and they basically become a babysitter and they're not happy about that. So we got a suite of reforms to employment law that make it easier to actually give people a chance in a very uncertain environment. So I could go on, but that's the, tax and regulation and balancing the budget is the gist of it.
Yeah, that's good. I read through a lot of the policies and it really resonated with me. There were it almost sounds as though it's been written by small business advocates. Some of the business policies.
Some of it was, yeah.
Yeah. So after all of this, what sort of opportunities are there in the new environment?
Well, I think, first of all, I talk to a lot of people who are doing it hard in SMEs. And what I say to them is, look, fundamentally before this, you had a good product, a good team, your customers like you. None of what's going on now is your fault. So if you can come through this, you're going to come through it a lot stronger. So that's the first thing, is that there's some light at the end of the tunnel. The second thing I'd say is that I do think there's an opportunity for New Zealand to really benefit from our our geostrategic, I guess, or our geographical position. Because normally the big problem with being in New Zealand is we're in the middle of nowhere. So if you're in business, you need capital, you need employees, you need an idea, you need customers, and really half the time the only thing we have is the ideas. Everything else is bloody miles away. So New Zealand entrepreneurs and resourcefulness and initiative, and they've got through that. But geez, it's not easy. Being an island nation on a pandemic planet is a huge opportunity. And I think there's a lot of people right now, especially a lot of expats and a lot of investors, who are saying, geez, New Zealand is looking pretty hot. But again, we've got to make it actually attractive for people to want to be here. So I look at foreign direct investment. There are people who could have their business bailed out by overseas family, but because that's an overseas person, it's difficult to do. We actually should be proud that people want to send capital and invest and have confidence in New Zealand. Instead, every time someone wants to send capital to New Zealand, we say, oh my God, and make them jump through hoops at the overseas investment office for so long they usually give up. I mean, it would be hilarious if it wasn't such a serious problem. So, we do have opportunities policy-wise. And in terms of business opportunities, look, if you had a good business before, and you can come through this, then you're actually probably going to be in a better space than you were before in the long term. But I admit it's so tough, and I just say to all the people out there who are running SMEs, hang in there, look after yourself, and we really hope that we can get some policy change to make your life a little easier.
Sure. And before we wrap it up, is there anything that you wanted to leave us with? Is there anything we didn't cover?
Oh, look, I think that this election is now very much in play, because the background music to the election is now a fundamental failure by the government to keep its promise that you could be COVID-free, get all the benefits and not pay any more costs. I think it is possible to deliver that promise with smarter public health. Our public health plan, which is our well-being approach to COVID-19, is on our website, and that really spells out how you would have a single epidemic response unit that's multidisciplinary, public and private sector to coordinate it. It talks about government being the referee, not the player in the game. It talks about having a risk-weighted approach so that we don't treat every type of traveller from every country the same. That's been folly, because it's let some bad people through, but it's also put too much expense on people that are safe. We've got to use better technology. If we'd actually taken contact tracing seriously for the last 3 or 4 months, we'd be in a better space right now. And finally, we've got to have constant improvement. What annoys me? Every time you hear the government, they say, oh, at least you're not Victoria, at least you're not Sweden. Well, guess what? There's like 6 other Australian states that are doing just great. And then they say, at least you're not Sweden. You know what? There's more countries in the world than just Sweden. Why aren't we comparing ourselves with the best? And if we'd taken that approach, we could be in a better space right now. And unfortunately, we're all on lockdown. With ACT, our objective is to win this election, hold the Nats' feet to the fire, and make sure that they deliver some higher quality and more transparent policy making to get us through this crisis.
Thank you, David.
Hey, thank you, Jess. It's been a real pleasure.
Good one. Okay, I appreciate your time. So we'll leave it there, and we'll wish David all the very best for the next few weeks.
Yeah, no. Hey, thanks, Jess. That was I hope that was helpful. I didn't go on too much.
No, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Cool.